The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun nobody fired. 12 board members, 3 lawyers, 1 billionaire worth $2.3 billion, and across from him a black woman in a coat she'd slept in for 6 months. Her fingernails still carried dirt from the shelter garden. The only shoes she owned were splitting at the sole. But her eyes locked onto Oliver Kensington's and did not blink. Her answer would kill a $20 million deal. It would crack open a truth that every person in that room had spent their whole careers avoiding. But first, you need to understand how a woman with nothing ended up in a room full of everything. Nadine Okafor had not always lived in a car. 2 years ago, she had a classroom. 23 third graders who called her Miss O. A chalkboard she decorated every Monday with a new word of the week. She had a husband named Terrence who worked construction and came home smelling like sawdust and sweat and kissed her on the forehead before he even took off his boots. They had a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Rent paid on time, groceries in the fridge. Amara had her own room with butterfly stickers on the wall. Then Terrence fell. 3 stories off a scaffolding that the safety inspector had flagged twice. The company had cut corners on harnesses. Terrence hit the concrete at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning. He was pronounced dead at 8:15. Amara was 4 years old. The company's insurance was a joke. Bare minimum coverage that barely paid for the ambulance ride. The lawyers said she could sue, but lawsuits take years. Years she did not have. The medical bills alone ate through their savings in 4 months. Then the school district cut funding. Nadine's position was eliminated. No classroom, no income, no Terrence. She missed 2 months of rent, just 2. The eviction notice arrived on a Thursday. She had 14 days to leave. In America, most families are exactly 1 emergency away from losing everything. 1 hospital bill, 1 layoff, 1 missed paycheck. Nadine was not lazy. She was not reckless. She was unlucky. And the system she had paid into her whole life did not catch her when she fell. Now she lived in a 2004 Toyota Corolla with 187,000 miles on it and a back door that hadn't opened since last winter. The passenger seat was folded flat, so Amara could stretch out on a sleeping bag that smelled like fabric softener because Nadine washed it at the laundromat every Sunday. That was the one thing she refused to let go. Clean sheets. Even if the bed was a car seat, every morning at 5:45 she drove to Grant Park. She parked near the public restrooms. She carried Amara inside, still half asleep, washed her face with warm water from a thermos she had heated at the gas station, brushed her teeth, combed her hair into 2 neat braids. Then she pulled out Amara's school uniform from a plastic bin in the She pressed it flat, using a pot of boiling water from the same gas station running the hot metal base across the wrinkles until the fabric looked crisp. Nobody at Amara's school knew. Not the teachers, not the other parents, not Amara's best friend Keela. As far as anyone could tell, Amara Okafor was a normal first grader with a normal life and a mother who always dropped her off on time with a packed lunch and a kiss on the cheek. The lunch was peanut butter and jelly every single day. Because peanut butter was cheap and bread was cheaper, and Nadine had calculated that she could feed Amara for 30 days on $47 if she did not eat lunch herself. She didn't. By 3:15 she picked Amara up. They drove to the library until it closed at 8. Amara did her homework at a corner table while Nadine searched job listings on the public computers. She applied to everything: grocery stores, warehouses, call centers, office cleaning crews. But every application asked for an address, and a phone number that wasn't prepaid, and references from an employer she hadn't had in 2 years. The rejections didn't come as letters. They came as silence, days of silence that stretched into weeks. At night, they parked on a quiet street 3 blocks south of the financial district. It was safer there. Better lit, less foot traffic after midnight. Nadine locked the doors, pulled the sunshades into place, and tucked Amara into the sleeping bag. "Mama, can we have pancakes tomorrow? We'll see, baby." the real kind, with the little face we'll see. Amara curled into her side. Nadine reached under the seat and pulled out a children's book. The same one they'd read 100 times. She clicked on the flashlight and held it between her chin and shoulder. Chapter 7, she whispered. Where we left off. She read until Amara's breathing slowed, until the small body against hers went limp and warm. Then she clicked off the flashlight and stared through the windshield at the skyline. 3 blocks north, the Kensington Capitol building rose 42 stories into the dark. Its lights burned all night, every window glowing white and cold against the sky. The kind of building where people made decisions about land and money and futures. The kind of building that never looked down. Nadine looked at it every night. Not with envy, not with anger, with the quiet, exhausted recognition of a woman who understood exactly how close she was to that world and how completely invisible she was inside it. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would wake up at 5:45. She would heat the water. She would press the uniform. She would make the lunch. She would smile at the school gate like everything was fine. Because that is what mothers do. They hold the whole thing together with their bare hands, even when their hands are shaking. Oliver Kensington had not seen the ground floor of Chicago in years. His world existed at altitude, the 42nd floor of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue where the air smelled like Italian leather and fresh espresso, and the particular confidence of men who had never been told no. His corner office had windows on 3 sides. On a clear day he could see all the way to Indiana. He never looked that far. He looked at spreadsheets. Oliver was 51. Silver hair cut close, jaw built square like his father's, eyes the color of creek water, pale and sharp, the kind of eyes that made junior analysts stammer through their presentations. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit every day. Different shirt, same suit. His watch was an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, $47,000 of titanium and precision that he checked 14 times a day, not because he needed to know the time, but because the motion calmed him. Kensington Capital managed a portfolio worth $11 billion. Commercial real estate, office towers, mixed-use developments, shopping complexes that replaced neighborhoods and called it progress. Oliver had built it all from a single strip mall. His father left him in 1998. He'd turned a $3 million inheritance into an empire through relentless acquisition and an instinct for what he called undervalued zones. Undervalued zones. That was the phrase. Not poor neighborhoods, not communities, zones. This morning Oliver sat at his dining table, a slab of reclaimed walnut that cost more than most people's cars. His personal chef had prepared eggs Benedict with smoked salmon and a side of fresh fruit that had been flown in from somewhere warm. He ate with one hand. The other held a briefing document. South Side Corridor. 14 acres. Current zoning, residential/commercial. Assessed value $8.2 million. Acquisition target $20 million. Projected ROI after development 340% over 7 years. He circled the ROI figure in red ink. 340%. That was the kind of number that made board members smile and investors wire money without asking questions. The deal was simple. Buy the land, demolish the existing structures, build a mixed-use complex with luxury apartments, retail space, and a boutique hotel. The city council was already on board. Tax increment financing would cover 1/3 of the construction costs. The zoning variance had been quietly approved 2 months ago. What the briefing document did not mention was that 847 people currently lived on those 14 acres. Families, old couples, single mothers, kids who walked to school past the same corner store their parents had walked past. A barber shop that had been cutting hair since 1973. A church with a congregation of 200 that held free dinners every Thursday night. None of that appeared in the numbers. Numbers don't have faces. "We're on track for Friday signatures," said Derek Holloway, sliding into the chair across from Oliver. Derek was 44, lean and sharp, featured the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. He'd been Oliver's COO for 6 years. Loyal, efficient, and ruthlessly focused on the bottom line. Legals cleared everything. Title search is clean. Environmental's a non-issue. We just need your pen. What about the residents? Oliver asked. Not because he was concerned, because due diligence required the question. Relocation assistance is built into the budget. Standard package. 60-day notice, moving stipend, list of alternative housing. It's generous, Oliver. More than the law requires. Oliver nodded. Generous. 60 days to uproot your life. Generous. He turned to the window. 42 stories below, a line of people curved around the block. The food bank at Grace Lutheran. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, rain or shine, the line appeared. Oliver had noticed it before. The way you notice pigeons on a ledge. Present unremarkable part of the scenery. Today he looked a moment longer than usual. Something about the line bothered him, though he could not say what. A woman near the front held a child on her hip. The child was wearing a bright yellow jacket. Oliver turned back to his desk. Schedule the signing for Friday, and have legal send me the final draft tonight. I want to read it one more time. You've read it 4 times, Derek said. Then I'll read it 5. Derek's smile tightened at the edges but held. Of course. He stood buttoning his jacket. At the door he paused. Oliver, this deal is the biggest acquisition in Kensington history. Don't overthink it. Oliver said nothing. Derek left. The office settled back into silence. Oliver looked at the briefing document again. 14 acres. 847 people. 340% return. He picked up his pen. Then set it down. Then picked it up again. The rain started at 8:47 that evening. Not the gentle kind, the Chicago kind. Sheets of water slamming sideways off Lake Michigan, turning the streets into shallow rivers, bending umbrellas inside out, sending everyone with any sense running indoors. Oliver Kensington had no sense tonight. He had walked out of Marchetti's on Wabash Avenue after a 3-hour dinner with 2 investors from Singapore, smiled his way through dessert and handshakes, then told his driver to go home. He needed to walk. He needed air. His mother's doctor had called during the appetizer course. Early-stage Alzheimer's. The word sat in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, heavy and spreading. His mother was 78. Margaret Kensington. Born Margaret Pruitt in a hollow in eastern Kentucky, where the nearest hospital was 40 miles of dirt road. She had married his father, moved to Chicago, raised Oliver with a quiet ferocity that he had never properly appreciated. She was the strongest person he knew, and she was disappearing. Oliver walked south on Michigan Avenue. Rain hammered his $1,200 overcoat. His Italian leather shoes filled with water at the second block. He didn't care. He was thinking about his mother's hands. The way they used to braid bread dough on Sunday mornings. The way they might one day forget how. He didn't see the puddle. His left foot hit standing water on a cracked piece of sidewalk. His leg shot forward. His body went backward. He slammed onto the concrete, hip first, then shoulder. Then the back of his head bounced off the pavement with a sound he heard from inside his own skull. His phone skittered across the wet ground and disappeared under a parked car. His right knee split open. Blood mixed with rain and swirled into the gutter. For 5 seconds, Oliver Kensington, worth $2.3 billion, lay on a Chicago sidewalk in the rain, unable to move. Nobody stopped. A cab rolled past. A couple hurried by under an umbrella without breaking stride. The city moved around him like water around a stone. Then a hand appeared, small, brown, strong. It gripped his arm above the elbow and pulled. Hey, can you hear me? You're bleeding. Hold still. Nadine Okafor had seen him go down from the driver's seat of the Corolla. She'd parked on this block 20 minutes earlier, waiting for Amara to fall asleep before moving to their usual overnight spot. When the man in the expensive coat hit the ground, she didn't think. She moved. She crouched beside him, rain plastering her hair to her face. Don't try to stand yet. Let me see your knee. Oliver blinked up at her. The streetlight behind her head turned the rain into a halo of orange light. I'm fine, he said, which was a lie. His knee was screaming. His head throbbed. You're not fine. That's a deep cut. Hold on. Nadine ran back to the Corolla. She opened the passenger door carefully so she wouldn't wake Amara and pulled the last clean towel from the glove compartment. The towel she'd planned to use to wash Amara's face in the morning. She ran back and pressed it against Oliver's knee, firm and steady. "Hold this here. Keep pressure on it." Oliver obeyed. He watched her as she dropped to her knees in the rain and reached under the parked car for his phone. She fished it out, wiped it on her sleeve, and handed it back. The screen was cracked, but still glowing. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. Then a small voice came from the Corolla. "Mama?" Amara stood in the open passenger door, clutching a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Her pajamas were pink with little stars on them. She looked at the bleeding man on the sidewalk with the fearless curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Baby, get back in the car. It's raining. Is the man okay? He's going to be fine. Get back in." But Amara walked over anyway. She held out a plastic water bottle half empty. "You can have it, mister. Mama says sharing makes the rain stop faster." Oliver took the bottle. His hand was shaking, and not from the cold. He looked at the little girl in star pajamas, standing barefoot in the rain, offering him water. Then he looked past her at the Corolla, the back seat full of blankets and pillows, the plastic bin in the trunk, the sunshades piled on the dashboard. He understood. "You live in your car," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Nadine's jaw tightened. She picked up Amara and held her on her hip. "Come on, baby. Back inside." "Wait." Oliver reached for his wallet. "Let me help, please. I can give you enough to get a room tonight. A hotel. Something." He held out $300. Nadine stared at the bills. Rain ran down her face like tears, but her eyes were dry and hard and clear. "No," she said. "Please, you have a child. It's pouring. I've had a child in the rain before, sir. We manage. There's no reason to manage when I can help right now." Nadine looked at him, looked at his ruined coat and his cracked phone and his bleeding knee and his wallet full of hundreds. Looked at all of it. Then she said something that Oliver Kensington would hear in his head every night for the next 3 weeks. Something that would follow him into boardrooms and bedrooms and the quiet hours before dawn. "I don't need your money, sir. I need the city to stop pretending we don't exist." She turned, carried Amara back to the car, buckled her in, and closed the door. Oliver stood on the sidewalk bleeding, holding $300 that nobody wanted, watching a woman and her daughter drive away in a car that was also their home. The water bottle sat on the ground where Amara had been standing, half empty, offered freely, by a child who had nothing and shared anyway. Oliver picked it up. He stood there for a long time, rain soaking through to his skin. The food bank line was gone now. The street was empty. But for the first time in his life, Oliver Kensington could see the people who were supposed to be invisible, and he could not unsee them. A homeless mother just refused $300 from a billionaire, in the rain, with her 6-year-old watching, and the words she said instead are about to follow Oliver Kensington into every room he enters for the next 72 hours. They will crack something open inside him that no amount of money can seal shut. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. Stay with me. Oliver did not sleep that night. He lay in his penthouse bedroom, 1,200 thread count sheets, temperature-controlled mattress, blackout curtains that cost more than Nadine's car, and he stared at the ceiling. "I need the city to stop pretending we don't exist." The sentence played on a loop, over and over. Not loud. Worse. Quiet. Like a crack spreading through glass. At 2 a.m., he got up, sat at his kitchen island in the dark, opened his laptop, and for the first time in his life, Oliver Kensington typed the words "Homeless Families Chicago" into a search engine. Not distressed real estate opportunities South Side. Not urban redevelopment tax incentives. Homeless families. The numbers hit him like cold water. Over 580,000 people in Chicago experienced homelessness in a single year. Nearly a third of them were children. Children sleeping in cars, in shelters, in 24-hour laundromats. Kids who went to school every morning with brushed hair and clean uniforms and empty stomachs and nobody knew, because their parents worked that hard to keep the secret. He read about medical bankruptcy, how a single hospital stay could wipe out a family's savings, how the average American household was $400 away from a financial crisis. $400. He spent more than that on lunch. He read about eviction, how in Cook County alone landlords filed tens of thousands of eviction cases every year, how most tenants never got a lawyer, how missing 2 months of rent, just 2, could put a family on the street with 14 days' notice. He read until his coffee went cold. Then he made another cup and kept reading. Meanwhile, Nadine's alarm went off at 5:45 like it always did. She heated the water. She pressed the uniform. She braided Amara's hair in the park restroom, her fingers moving fast and gentle while Amara hummed a song from school. She packed the peanut butter sandwich. She drove to the school gate and kissed Amara goodbye and smiled like the world was fine. Then she drove to a grocery store on Halsted Street and asked about the cashier position she'd seen posted in the window. "Do you have a permanent address?" The manager asked, not unkindly. "I'm in a transitional situation, but I'm reliable. I can start immediately." The manager's eyes softened, but her answer didn't. "I'm sorry. We need a fixed address for the background check." Nadine nodded, thanked her, left. She drove to a warehouse hiring for overnight shifts. Same question, same answer. She tried a cleaning company on Archer Avenue. The woman at the desk didn't even let her finish the sentence. 3 applications, 3 rejections. Not because she couldn't do the work, because she didn't have a front door. She picked Amara up at 3:15. They went to the library. Amara spread her homework across the table, while Nadine sat beside her, pretending to read a magazine, pretending the morning hadn't happened. "Mama, yeah, baby. Are we poor?" Nadine's hand tightened on the magazine. She kept her voice steady, level, the way she used to keep it when a student asked a question that deserved more than a simple answer. "No, baby. We're between homes. That's different." "How is it different?" "Because between means it's temporary. It means we're going somewhere. We're just not there yet." Amara considered this. Then she nodded, picked up her pencil, and went back to her math worksheet. And Nadine sat there holding the magazine she wasn't reading, blinking hard against the burning behind her eyes. 48 hours after the night in the rain, Oliver Kensington did something he had never done in 23 years of real estate development. He drove to the site. Not the site as a pin on a map. Not the site as a spreadsheet line item. The actual physical breathing place where 847 people lived. He parked his black Range Rover on 51st Street and stepped out into a neighborhood he had only ever seen from altitude. And what he saw broke the spreadsheet in half. There was a barbershop on the corner, Curtis's, a faded red and white pole still spinning beside the door. Through the window he could see an old man cutting a teenager's hair, both of them laughing at something on a phone. A sign in the window read, "First haircut free for every kindergartner since 1973. Across the street was a small church. Whitewashed brick, hand-painted sign, Grace Community Fellowship. All are welcome. Thursday dinner 6 p.m. A woman was taping a flyer to the door about a weekend coat drive. And behind the church, a cracked asphalt basketball court where 6 kids were running a full-court game. Their shouts echoed off the buildings. One kid hit a 3-pointer from the corner, and his friends erupted. Pure joy. The kind of sound that doesn't exist in boardrooms. Oliver stood on the sidewalk and watched. This was his 14 acres, his 340% return, his undervalued zone. Except it wasn't undervalued, it was just underestimated. By men like him, who looked at maps instead of faces. He got back in his car. He sat for a long time with the engine running and his hands on the wheel. Then he drove back downtown in silence, walked into his office, and stared at the contract on his desk. $20 million. His pen was right there. Derek had left it positioned perfectly beside the signature line. Oliver looked at the contract. Then he looked at the photograph on the wall behind his desk. His mother. Margaret Kensington, born Margaret Pruitt. The woman from a hollow in eastern Kentucky, where families shared well water and nobody locked their doors because nobody had anything worth stealing. She had been poor once. The kind of poor where you wore your cousin's shoes and ate squirrel for dinner and walked 4 miles to a one-room schoolhouse. She never talked about it. But she never forgot it either. Oliver stared at her face in the photograph. Young, strong, proud. The same expression he'd seen on Nadine's face in the rain. He put the pen down, and he left the office without signing anything. Oliver just discovered that the deal which would make him richer is the same deal that destroyed Nadine's life. But what he does next is something no one in that boardroom saw coming. Don't skip ahead. The real twist hasn't happened yet. 3 days later, Oliver walked into a community shelter on the west side. He wore jeans and a plain gray jacket, no watch, no Italian shoes. He looked like any other volunteer showing up for a Tuesday shift. The woman at the front desk gave him a clipboard and a hairnet and pointed him toward the kitchen. He wasn't there to serve soup. He was there to find Nadine. It took 40 minutes. She came in through the back entrance, carrying Amara on one hip and a canvas bag on the other. She collected 2 meal boxes, a bag of toiletries, and a children's book from the donation bin. She moved through the shelter with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been here before. No eye contact with the other visitors. No lingering. Get in, get what you need, get out. Preserve what's left of your dignity. Oliver intercepted her at the exit. Nadine. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed. You. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? There's a diner on the next block. Why? Because I have questions. And I think you have answers. Nadine looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at Amara. Baby, you want some pancakes? Amara's face lit up. The real kind. The real kind. They sat in a booth at Manny's Diner on Kedzie Avenue. The kind of place with sticky menus and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1987. Oliver ordered eggs and toast. Nadine ordered pancakes for Amara, a glass of milk and black coffee for herself. Nothing else, Oliver noticed. He didn't comment. Amara demolished the pancakes in 7 minutes, then curled up against Nadine's side and fell asleep. Nadine pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wiped syrup off her daughter's chin. The gesture was so gentle, so practiced, that Oliver's chest tightened. You were a teacher, he said. I was. Nadine wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. 3rd grade. Lincoln Elementary. 6 years. What happened? Nadine looked at him, measured him, deciding how much truth he could handle. My husband happened, she said. Terrence. He worked construction, good at it too. Strong hands, careful eye. The kind of man who measured twice, cut once, and still came home with enough energy to read Amara a bedtime story. She paused. Her thumb traced the rim of the cup. He was working a high-rise project on the north side, 3 stories up on scaffolding that had already been flagged twice by the safety inspector. The contractor cut corners on harnesses. Terrence fell at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning. Oliver said nothing. There was nothing to say. The company had bare minimum insurance. Covered the ambulance. Barely. The lawyers said I could sue, but it would take years. Years I didn't have. The medical bills ate our savings in 4 months. Then the school district cut funding. My position got eliminated. No classroom, no income, no Terrence. Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just worn smooth like a stone in a riverbed. She'd told this story before. To social workers, to shelter intake officers, to herself in the dark trying to make sense of it. I missed 2 months of rent, she said. Just 2, 14 days notice. That's what they give you. 14 days to pack up your daughter's butterfly stickers and explain to a 4-year-old why we're sleeping in the car. Oliver's hand tightened around his fork. The company that killed her husband paid almost nothing. The system that was supposed to catch her didn't. And the city that should have noticed looked the other way. Because it's easier to not see people when they're sleeping in a car with the sunshades up. Where were you living, he asked, before the eviction? South Side, 53rd and Halstead. Little 2-bedroom. Nothing special. But it was ours. The blood drained from Oliver's face. 53rd and Halstead. That was inside the 14 acres. That was his acquisition zone. The apartment where Amara had butterfly stickers on her wall was sitting inside the boundary lines of his $20 million deal. He opened his mouth, closed it. His pulse hammered in his temples. "You okay?" Nadine asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," he said, which was a lie. He was looking at a ghost, the ghost of what his money was about to do to 800 more families just like hers. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling me." Nadine shrugged. "You asked. Most people don't." Oliver paid the check, left a $40 tip on a $12 meal. Nadine noticed, but didn't comment. They walked out into the gray Chicago afternoon. "Can I call you?" Oliver asked. "If I have more questions." Nadine studied him again. "You're not going to try to give me money again, are you?" "No." "Then yeah. I've got a prepaid phone. 30 minutes a month. Use them wisely." She wrote the number on a napkin, took Amara from the booth still half asleep, and walked to the Corolla. Oliver watched them drive away. Then he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking south, toward 53rd and Halsted, toward the neighborhood he was about to bulldoze. He drove back to the office in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the hum of the engine and the weight of what he now knew. His corner office was dark when he arrived. The cleaning crew had already been through. The contract sat on his desk exactly where he'd left it. $20 million. Derek's pen still waiting beside the signature line. Oliver sat down. He looked at the contract. Then he looked up at the photograph on the wall. His mother. Young and proud and poor in a way that most people couldn't imagine. Margaret Pruitt grew up in a house with a dirt floor. She once told Oliver that the hardest part of being poor wasn't the hunger, it was the invisibility. The way people looked through you like you weren't there. "I need the city to stop pretending we don't exist." Oliver pushed the contract to the far edge of his desk. He picked up his phone and dialed Derek. "I need a full community impact report on the Southside acquisition," he said. "Every family, every business, every school and church within the boundary. I want names, not numbers. And I want it on my desk by Thursday." Silence on the other end. Then Derek's voice, careful and controlled. "Oliver, the signing is Friday. Then you'd better work fast. Is there a problem with the deal?" "There might be." "Oliver, this is a $20 million acquisition. The board approved it. Legal cleared it. The investors are committed. You can't just pump the brakes because of some community concern that wasn't even on the radar 2 weeks ago. It's on my radar now." What changed? Oliver looked at the photograph of his mother. "I did." He hung up. Derek Holloway stood in his office on the 39th floor, phone in hand, jaw clenched tight enough to crack a molar. Something had changed in Oliver, something Derek didn't like. And Derek Holloway did not tolerate variables he couldn't control. He pulled up his calendar. He had 3 days before the signing. 3 days to figure out what was wrong with Oliver, and 3 days to fix it or work around it. Nadine didn't know about the deal. Not yet. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon at the Woodlawn Community Center, a cinder block building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs and a broken coffee maker that someone had taped a sign to reading, "Don't even try." A woman from the neighborhood association stood at the front of the room with a stack of photocopied documents. "The city council approved a zoning variance 2 months ago," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "A development company called Kensington Capital is purchasing 14 acres of residential land between 51st and 55th Street, Halsted to Morgan. All existing structures will be demolished. Residents have 60 days to relocate." The room erupted. 30 people all talking at once. An old man slammed his fist on a folding table. A young mother started crying. 2 teenagers stormed out. The noise was raw and ragged, and full of the kind of anger that comes from being told your home is worth less than the dirt it sits on. Nadine sat in the back row. Amara was at the library with a shelter volunteer. Nadine had come alone, and she was silent while the room boiled around her. Then she stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She spoke the way she used to speak to her third graders when the classroom got too loud. Calm, clear, absolute. My name is Nadine Okafor. I used to live on 53rd and Halsted, apartment 4B. My daughter took her first steps in that apartment. My husband used to fix the radiator every November because the landlord wouldn't. We paid our rent on time for 3 years, and when I couldn't pay for 2 months after my husband died, I was out in 14 days. The room went quiet. I know what it means to lose your home. And I know what they're going to tell you. They'll say it's progress. They'll say there's relocation assistance. They'll say it's generous. But you can't relocate a community. You can't put a barbershop that's been here for 50 years into a moving truck. You can't pack up the church dinners and the Saturday basketball games and the woman who watches your kids for free because she knows your name. She paused, looked around the room. This neighborhood is worth something. Not because of the land, because of us. And a public hearing is supposed to mean they listen. But most of the time they've already decided before we sit down. So if we're going to fight this, we need more than anger. We need facts. We need documentation. We need every single person in this room to write down what this neighborhood means to them, because they can ignore a protest. They cannot ignore a record. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then the old man who had slammed the table nodded. "She's right," he said. And one by one, people started pulling out pens. 12 blocks north, Derek Holloway sat in his office reading a report from a private investigator. He kept on retainer. Oliver Kensington had been seen at a West Side shelter. Oliver Kensington had been seen at a diner on Kedzie with a black woman and a child. Oliver Kensington had requested a community impact report that was not part of any standard acquisition protocol. Derek set down the report. He leaned back in his chair, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he discovers exactly where the problem is. Oliver wanted to do the right thing. Derek didn't care about the right thing. Derek cared about the 7-figure bonus tied to the South Side deal closing on schedule. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Get me everything you can on a woman named Nadine Okafor. Address, employment history, criminal record, custody situation, everything." He hung up, straightened his tie, and walked down the hall to Oliver's office to deliver the community impact report with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The call came on a Thursday morning. Nadine was at the library filling out her 4th job application of the week on a public computer when her prepaid phone buzzed. "Nadine, it's Oliver Kensington." She leaned back in the plastic chair. "You're using up my minutes. I'll keep it short. I'd like you to come to my office. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Silence. Why I'm assembling a review of the South Side Development Project. I want community input. Real input. Not the kind that comes from consultants who've never set foot in the neighborhood. You want me to consult on a real estate deal. I want you to tell my team what they're not seeing, the way you told me." Nadine stared at the computer screen. The cursor blinked on a job application field that read, "Current address." She hadn't filled it in. "Mr. Kensington, I live in my car. I don't have a business degree. I don't have a suit. I don't even have a working printer. I'm not looking for a degree. I'm looking for someone who knows the truth. You know the truth better than anyone in my building. And what makes you think your people are going to listen to me?" "They won't," Oliver said. "That's exactly why I need you there." Nadine closed her eyes. She thought about the community meeting, about the old man nodding, about the young mother crying, about 847 people who were about to lose their homes the same way she'd lost hers. "If there's even a 1% chance I can stop them from doing to other families what they did to mine," she said slowly, "I have to try. Monday, 9 o'clock. I'll leave your name at the front desk. I'll be there." She hung up, stared at the phone in her hand. 17 minutes left on her monthly plan. She'd just spent 3 of them on a conversation that might change everything or change nothing at all. Monday morning, Nadine stood outside the Kensington Capitol building at 847, 42 stories of glass and steel rising into a sky the color of dirty dishwater. She wore her best clothes, a black blouse she'd washed in the shelter bathroom and dried over the hand dryer, dark slacks she'd ironed with the hot water pot. shoes with a crack along the left sole that she'd filled with superglue the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a clean bun. She carried a folder, a notebook, and a laptop she'd borrowed from the public library's lending program. She looked up at the building. Every window reflected the sky back at itself. This was the kind of place that was designed to make you feel small. Nadine straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked through the revolving door. The lobby was marble and chrome and silence, the kind of silence that costs money. A woman at the reception desk looked up, and her eyes traveled the full length of Nadine's outfit before reaching her face. The assessment took approximately 2 seconds. Nadine felt every millisecond of it. "I'm here to see Oliver Kensington," she said. "My name is Nadine Okafor." The receptionist checked her screen. Something shifted in her expression, surprise quickly masked. "Of course, 42nd floor. Miss Brandt will meet you at the elevator." Miss Brandt turned out to be a tall woman with silver hair and a clipboard who said almost nothing during the elevator ride. The doors opened onto a floor of glass-walled offices and people moving with the particular urgency of those who build by the hour. Every suit in the hallway cost more than Nadine's monthly food budget. She knew it. They knew it. And every pair of eyes she passed conducted the same silent inventory the receptionist had. She kept walking. Oliver met her outside the conference room. His face broke into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close. "Relief, maybe. You came. I said I would. People say a lot of things. I'm not people." He led her into the conference room. Glass walls. A table long enough to land a small airplane on. 12 chairs, most of them occupied. Analysts, lawyers, project managers, all of them polished and pressed and utterly certain of their place in the world. And then there was Derek Holloway. He stood when Nadine entered, extended his hand. His grip was firm, his smile wide, and his eyes completely empty. "So, you're the community expert Oliver's been talking about," he said. "Fascinating." The word landed like a paper cut. Small, precise, designed to sting without leaving a mark. Nadine shook his hand and said nothing. Oliver gestured to a seat near the head of the table. "Nadine, thank you for joining us. I've asked you here to provide perspective on the community impact of the South Side project. The floor is yours whenever you're ready." Nadine sat down. She opened her notebook. She listened. For 45 minutes, she listened. An analyst named Graham presented the acquisition timeline. A lawyer named Chen walked through the zoning approvals. A project manager named Torres showed renderings of the proposed development all glass and green space, and the words "vibrant community hub" repeated 11 times across 27 slides. Then Torres put up a slide titled "Displacement Mitigation." Below it, a single bullet point: minimal displacement impact. Relocation assistance provided, per municipal guidelines. Nadine opened the borrowed laptop. "May I?" she said. Oliver nodded. Torres looked confused. Derek leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Nadine connected the laptop to the projector. The screen changed. Torres's sleek rendering vanished, replaced by a hand-drawn map. Color-coded, annotated in neat teacher's handwriting. "This is the 14 acres you're buying," Nadine said. "Block by block. I built this from public records, community surveys, and conversations with the people who actually live there." She pointed to a cluster of blue dots. "These are families with children under 18, 112 families. 67 of them single-parent households. The yellow dots are elderly residents living alone, 41 of them. The green ones are small businesses that have operated for more than 10 years, 14 businesses." She moved her finger across the map. "This red area is the 2-block radius around Grace Community Fellowship, Thursday night dinners, weekend coat drives, after-school tutoring. It serves roughly 300 people a week who have nowhere else to go." The room was silent. "Your slide said minimal displacement impact." Nadine looked at Torres, then at Derek, then at Oliver. "I counted 847 people. That's not minimal. That's a neighborhood." Nobody spoke. Graham stared at his notes. Chen studied the table surface. Torres's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Derek uncrossed his arms. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had hardened into something sharp and calculating. Oliver looked at the map. Then, he looked at Nadine, and in the silence of that glass-walled room, 42 stories above the city, something fundamental shifted in the air between them. Derek Holloway's investigator delivered the file on Wednesday morning. 3 pages, single-spaced. Everything there was to know about Nadine Okafor printed in neat black type like a death sentence. Current address none. Employment none. Vehicle registered 2004 Toyota Corolla. Spouse deceased. Child Amara Okafor, age 6, enrolled at Burnham Elementary. Last known residence apartment 4B 53rd and Halstead, evicted 18 months ago. Currently classified as unsheltered homeless per Cook County records. Derek read it twice. Then he smiled. He didn't send the file to the board directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, he left a copy on the shared printer on the 38th floor, the one the board members used before meetings. He made sure the cover page was face up. He made sure Nadine's name was visible. Then he walked away. By noon, the hallway outside the executive conference room hummed with whispers. "Did you see the file on the printer, Oliver's consultant? She's homeless. She lives in her car. With a child." Oliver hired a homeless woman to advise on a $20 million deal. Is this a joke? That last sentence came from Richard Pratt, a board member with silver cufflinks and a Harvard MBA, and the particular confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether his opinion mattered. He said it, standing near the elevator, coffee in hand, voice just loud enough to carry. The thing about Richard Pratt's sentence was this: if a consultant from McKinsey had stood in that conference room and presented the exact same map with the exact same data, Richard Pratt would have nodded thoughtfully and asked for a follow-up report. The information didn't change. The messenger did, and that was enough to make the information worthless in his eyes. This is how bias works in a boardroom. Not with slurs, not with obvious cruelty. With a raised eyebrow, a whispered question, a file left on a printer, the quiet surgical removal of a person's credibility based on everything except what they actually said. Nadine knew. She knew the way you know when the temperature drops before a storm. She walked into the Kensington Capitol building on Thursday morning, and the receptionist's greeting was 2 degrees cooler. The elevator ride was silent where it used to have small talk. An analyst she'd worked with on the community map avoided eye contact in the hallway. Nobody said anything to her face. They didn't have to. The air said it for them. She sat in her borrowed office, a glass-walled room on the 40th floor that Oliver had cleared for her, and she opened her laptop. The library's lending program laptop, with a cracked spacebar and a battery that died after 90 minutes. She did not cry. She did not complain. She did not go to Oliver. Instead, she typed Community Inclusive Development Case Studies into the search bar. She read about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston. She read about community land trusts in Burlington, Vermont. She read about mixed-income developments in Atlanta that had preserved existing communities while bringing in new investment. She took notes in her teacher's handwriting, filling page after page of a dollar store notebook. If they were going to dismiss her because of where she slept, she would make her argument so airtight that they couldn't dismiss what she said. At 4 o'clock, Derek walked into Oliver's office and closed the door. "We need to talk about Friday," he said. "What about it?" "The board is getting restless, Oliver. Every day this deal sits unsigned. The company loses $47,000 in potential interest alone. I ran the numbers this morning. The Singapore investors have already called twice asking for a timeline. If we don't sign by end of week, they may pull their commitment entirely." Oliver leaned back in his chair. "I asked for a community impact report. And you got one. Torres presented it last week. Torres presented a slide with 1 bullet point. I asked for something real." Derek's jaw tightened. "Oliver, with all due respect, you're letting a woman with no qualifications, no credentials, and no permanent address derail the biggest deal this company has ever made. The board is talking. They're concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About your judgment." The words landed hard. Oliver's eyes narrowed. "My judgment built this company, Derek. And your judgment is now being influenced by someone who doesn't belong in this building. Careful, Oliver's voice dropped. Be very careful about who you say doesn't belong. Derek held up his hands. I'm on your side. I've always been on your side. But the board votes on Friday, and right now you don't have the votes to delay. If you don't sign, they'll find someone who will. He left. The door clicked shut. Oliver sat alone in the silence of his corner office 42 stories above a city full of people he was only just beginning to see. That evening, Nadine picked up Amara from the shelter volunteer who'd been watching her. They drove to their usual spot, 3 blocks south of the financial district. Nadine parked, put up the sunshades, made a peanut butter sandwich, and split it in half. Amara ate. Nadine didn't. Mama, yeah, baby. Are you going to save those people's houses? Nadine looked at her daughter. 6 years old, star pajamas, one-eared rabbit. Eyes that still believed the world could be fair if you just tried hard enough. Nadine pulled Amara close, kissed the top of her head, held her there against her chest. I'm going to try, baby. That's all anyone can do. Amara nodded against her shoulder. I think you can do it, Mama. Nadine closed her eyes. The Kensington Capitol building glowed in the windshield, 42 stories of cold white light. Oliver had 72 hours to decide. The board meeting was Friday, and somewhere on the 39th floor, Derek Holloway was making phone calls that nobody knew about. Nadine is about to discover something in those development documents that will change everything. Not just for her, not just for Oliver, but for every family on that block. And when she brings it to that boardroom, the most powerful men in Chicago won't know what hit them. It started with a footnote. Nadine was at the Harold Washington Library on Thursday night, Amara asleep in the chair beside her, wrapped in the sleeping bag they'd carried in from the car. The security guard, a quiet man named Luis, who had seen them enough times to stop asking questions, pretended not to notice. He let them stay 30 minutes past closing. Nadine was reading through the public zoning records for the Southside acquisition. Hundreds of pages of legal language survey maps, environmental assessments, title histories, the kind of documents designed to be so dense that nobody without a law degree would bother reading them. But Nadine had been a teacher. She knew how to read carefully. She knew that the most important information was often buried in the smallest print. On page 247 of the title history, in a footnote, so small it might have been an accident, she found it. Parcels 14A through 14F. Subject to existing community land trust covenant, established 1974, renewed 1999. See Appendix J. Nadine's breath stopped. She flipped to Appendix J. It wasn't there. The appendix had been removed from the public filing, deliberately. The page numbers jumped from Appendix 1 to Appendix K. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. 14 minutes left on the prepaid plan. She used 6 of them. The man who answered sounded like gravel and Sunday sermons. Reverend Clarence Mays, 72 years old. Pastor of Grace Community Fellowship for 40 years. The same church with the Thursday dinners and the weekend coat drives. The same church sitting on the 14 acres that Kensington Capitol wanted to bulldoze. Reverend Mays. My name is Nadine Okafor. I used to live on 53rd and Halstead. I need to ask you about a community land trust. Silence on the line. Then a long exhale. I haven't heard anyone mention that trust in 20 years, he said quietly. It exists. It exists. It was established in 1974 by the Southside Community Coalition. After the Civil Rights Movement, black neighborhoods all over the country were losing land to developers and highway projects. Eminent domain was being used like a weapon. So, community organizations started creating land trusts, legal protections that kept the land in community hands. The trust on 53rd Street covers 6 parcels. It was renewed in 1999 for another 50 years. So it's still active, Nadine said. It's still active. And if it's still active, that land cannot be sold to a private developer without the explicit consent of the Community Trust Board, which is me, Mrs. Dolores Washington, and Mr. Henry Abrams. Nadine's pulse hammered. Reverend Mays. Do you know a company called Kensington Capital? I know they've been buying up half the South Side. They're trying to buy your 6 parcels. And the trust isn't mentioned anywhere in their acquisition documents. Someone removed it from the public filing. Silence. Long and heavy. Lord have mercy, the Reverend said softly. They buried it. Yes, sir. They buried it. Nadine hung up. 8 minutes left on her phone. She used 2 more to call Oliver. We need to talk, she said, tonight. Oliver heard something in her voice that made him grab his car keys without asking a single question. They met at an all-night diner on Western Avenue, the kind of place with coffee that never ran out and waitresses who didn't care how long you sat. Nadine spread the documents across the table, the title history, the footnote, the missing appendix. Oliver read it. His face went white, then gray. Then a color that didn't have a name, somewhere between fury and shame. This trust has been active since 1974, Nadine said. It was specifically created to protect black communities from losing their land to developers. Your legal team knew about it. They removed the appendix from the public filing, deliberately. That's not possible, Oliver said, but his voice had no conviction in it. Page 247, footnote 14. They left the reference in the title history but stripped the appendix. It was sloppy, or arrogant, or both. Oliver stared at the documents. His hands were flat on the table, pressing down like he was trying to keep the earth from shifting beneath him. Derek, he said. Derek, Nadine confirmed. Why would he hide this? Nadine looked at him, steady, unflinching. Because the truth is expensive, Mr. Kensington, and lies are profitable. Oliver sat there for a long time. The diner hummed around them. A trucker at the counter ordered pie. A waitress refilled coffee without being asked. The world kept turning while Oliver Kensington's world stopped. Then he gathered the documents, stood up, and looked at Nadine. Friday morning, he said. Board meeting, 9 o'clock. Be there. They won't want me there. I don't care what they want. I care about what's right. He left a 50 on the table and walked into the night. Friday morning. 8:56 a.m. 42nd floor. The conference room filled like a courtroom before a verdict. 12 board members. 3 lawyers. Derek Holloway, in his sharpest suit, his face arranged into an expression of calm confidence. Oliver at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. And one empty chair positioned to Oliver's right. Before we begin, Derek said, straightening his tie, I want to confirm that this meeting is for board members and senior executives only. The agenda is straightforward. Final vote on the Southside acquisition. All documents have been reviewed. All due diligence is complete. We simply need Oliver's signature. Oliver looked at the empty chair, then at the door. We're waiting for one more person, he said. Derek's smile faltered. Who? The conference room door opened. Nadine Okafor walked in. She wore the same black blouse, the same dark slacks, the same shoes with superglue in the crack along the left sole. She carried a folder thick enough to stop a bullet and a borrowed laptop tucked under her arm. Her hands were rough, her nails were short and clean, and her eyes swept the room with the quiet authority of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Derek's face went rigid. You're bringing her into this room. She's not a consultant, Oliver. She's a liability. Oliver didn't look at Derek. He looked at the board. She's the only person in this building who's told me the truth. Nadine sat down. She opened the folder. She connected the laptop to the projector. And for 12 minutes, she laid out everything. The Community Land Trust. The 1,974 Covenant. The 1,999 Renewal. The missing appendix. The footnote on page 247 that someone had tried to bury. She spoke the way she'd spoken at the community meeting. Calm, clear, absolute. No tears, no anger. Just facts, stacked like bricks, building a wall that couldn't be knocked down. The 6 parcels covered by this trust cannot be legally transferred to a private entity without the consent of the Community Trust Board, she said. That consent was never sought. It was never even mentioned, because someone in this company removed the documentation from the public filing. The room erupted. Board members turned to each other. Lawyers whispered furiously. Derek leaned forward. "This is an outdated legal technicality," he said, his voice sharp. "That trust hasn't been enforced in decades. No court in Cook County would uphold a 50-year-old covenant over a $20 million development deal." "The covenant was renewed in 1999, Nadine said quietly. "It's current, and the trust board members are still alive. I've spoken to all three of them." "You've spoken to them," Derek repeated, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "A woman who lives in her car has been conducting unauthorized legal research and contacting third parties about a confidential acquisition. This is a breach of every NDA in existence." "I never signed an NDA," Nadine said. "You never asked me to. Maybe because you didn't expect the homeless woman to actually read the documents." Silence. Then Oliver raised his hand. The room went quiet. Every head turned. He looked at the contract on the table. He looked at the rendering of the development. He looked at Derek. Then he turned to Nadine. "If this were your neighborhood," he said slowly, "your home, your daughter's school, what would you want the man sitting in my chair to do?" Derek snorted. "Oliver, this isn't a philosophy class. I'm not asking you, Derek. I'm asking her." Nadine didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, the rough hands, the clean nails, the hands that washed Amara's face every morning with water from a thermos, the hands that pressed a school uniform with a pot of boiling water, the hands that had nothing and held everything. Then she looked up, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice of a teacher standing in front of a classroom delivering the most important lesson of her life. "I would want him to remember that every number on that spreadsheet used to be a person, that the undervalued zone he sees on the map is where Mrs. Patterson taught 3 generations of children to read, where Mr. Abrams fixed every kid's bicycle for free on Saturdays, where my daughter took her first steps." She paused. The room didn't breathe. "I would want him to ask himself, when did we start believing that profit is more important than people? Because the moment we accepted that, that's when we all became homeless, not just people like me, all of us." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ventilation system hum 42 stories up. Oliver stared at her. Then he looked down at the contract. Then he picked up his pen. 12 board members leaned forward. Derek's eyes gleamed. The lawyers held their breath. Oliver drew a single line through the signature block. "Diagonal, decisive, final. The deal is off," he said. The room exploded. Derek shot to his feet. "You can't do this. The board approved this deal 6 weeks ago. You don't have the authority to unilaterally cancel a board-approved acquisition." "I do, when the acquisition was built on fraud," Oliver said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the noise like a blade through silk. "The Community Land Trust was deliberately concealed from this board. That's a material omission in the due diligence process. It exposes the company to litigation, regulatory action, and reputational damage that would dwarf the cost of this deal." "That's absurd," Derek said. "The trust is a relic. It's unenforceable. Any competent lawyer will tell you that." "Then why did you hide it?" Oliver asked. Derek's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't hide anything." Page 247 of the title history. Footnote 14. Reference to Appendix J, an appendix that was removed from the filing before it reached this board. Oliver opened his own folder and slid a printed page across the table. "I had an independent title search conducted last night. The original filing with Cook County includes Appendix J. The version our legal team submitted to this board does not. Someone deleted it." Every head in the room turned to Derek. "This is a fiduciary violation," Oliver continued. "A senior officer of this company deliberately withheld material information from the board of directors to advance a deal that served his personal interests. Derek's compensation package includes a 7-figure bonus tied directly to the closing of this acquisition. He had every incentive to bury the trust and no incentive to disclose it. Derek's face drained of color. Then it flooded red. He looked around the room for an ally, a sympathetic face, someone who would back him up. He found none. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I'm being set up by a homeless woman who has no business being in this building. Miss Okafor found what your entire legal team either missed or concealed," Oliver said. "That doesn't make her unqualified. That makes her the only competent person in this room." Richard Pratt, the board member with the silver cufflinks who had whispered in the hallway, cleared his throat. "I move to terminate Derek Holloway's position as COO, effective immediately pending a full internal investigation into the handling of the Southside acquisition documents." "Seconded," said a woman at the end of the table. The vote was 9-3. Derek stood there. His tie suddenly looked too tight. His suit suddenly looked like a costume. He picked up his phone, his pen, his leather portfolio. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped, turned, looked directly at Nadine. "You think you've won?" he said. His voice was low and cold. "You're still homeless." Nadine looked at him. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just held his gaze, the way you hold a door open for someone who doesn't deserve your courtesy but gets it anyway. "And you're still wrong," she said. Derek left. The door closed behind him. The room settled into a strange, heavy quiet. Not celebration, not relief. Something more like the silence after a storm passes and you step outside to see what's left standing. Nadine sat in her chair. She closed the folder. She shut the laptop. Her hands were steady, but something behind her eyes looked infinitely tired. She had not won anything today. She had stopped something. There is a difference. Board members filed out in clusters of 2 and 3, speaking in low voices, avoiding Nadine's eyes. Not because they disliked her, because they were ashamed. They had dismissed her, whispered about her, questioned her credibility based on everything except what she actually knew. And she had been right. About all of it. The room emptied until only Oliver and Nadine remained. He stood on one side of the long conference table. She stood on the other. The Chicago skyline spread behind them, gray and vast and indifferent. "Thank you," Oliver said. Nadine looked at him. Her eyes were clear and dry and old in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Don't thank me," she said. "Fix it." Then she picked up her things, walked out of the conference room, took the elevator down, 42 floors, crossed the marble lobby, pushed through the revolving door, and got into a 2004 Toyota Corolla with a back door that didn't open and a sleeping bag in the passenger seat. She drove to the shelter, picked up Amara, buckled her in. "How was your day, Mama Long, baby? Really long. Did you save the houses?" Nadine looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. 6 years old. Star pajamas folded in the trunk. One-eared rabbit in her lap. "Not yet," she said. "But we're closer." Nadine just helped bring down a $20 million deal and exposed a corporate cover-up. But she's still sleeping in her car tonight. What Oliver does next isn't charity. It's something far more radical. And it's about to change an entire neighborhood. The meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon, not in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor, in the basement of Grace Community Fellowship. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the broken coffee maker with the sign that still read, "Don't even try." Oliver sat across from Reverend Clarence Mays and Nadine at a table covered in documents, sketches, and a hand-drawn map of the South Side that Nadine had updated with colored markers. Amara sat in the corner, drawing pictures of houses with a box of crayons the Reverend kept in his desk for visiting children. "I don't want to tear this neighborhood down," Oliver said. "I want to rebuild it. With the people who already live here." Reverend Mays leaned back and folded his arms. He had heard promises from powerful men before. His expression said as much. "What does that look like, Mr. Kensington, specifically?" "Community inclusive development. We keep the land trust intact. We build affordable housing units alongside the existing structures. New construction that's designed with the community, not for the community. We preserve Grace Fellowship. We preserve Curtis's barbershop. We renovate the basketball court. And we create jobs for residents in the construction and management of the new properties. And who pays for it? Kensington Capital. We redirect the $20 million from acquisition to investment. The return is slower, the margins are thinner, but the project sustains itself because the community sustains it. The Reverend looked at Nadine. You believe him? Nadine didn't hesitate. I believe in the plan. There's a neighborhood in Boston called Dudley Street. 30 years ago, it was abandoned lots and burned-out buildings. The community created a land trust, partnered with developers, and built affordable housing that the residents controlled. Today, it's one of the most stable neighborhoods in the city. It works. It's been proven. And who runs the community side of this? The Reverend asked. Oliver looked at Nadine. I'd like Nadine to be the community liaison director. Full salary. Benefits. She's the bridge between this neighborhood and my company. She speaks both languages. Nadine's jaw tightened. This isn't a gift, Oliver. It's not a gift. It's a job. You're the most qualified person I've met for it. And I'm not saying that because you're a good person. I'm saying it because you walked into a boardroom full of people who wanted you to fail, and you brought facts that none of them could argue with. That's qualification. Nadine stared at the table, then at Amara in the corner drawing a house with a yellow door. One more thing, Oliver said. He slid a document across the table. I want to establish an education fund for children in the development zone. Tutoring, school supplies, college savings accounts. I'd like to name it the Terrence Okafor Education Fund. Nadine's hand stopped above the document. Her breath caught. You don't have to, she said quietly. Your husband built buildings, Oliver said. He deserved better than what happened to him. This won't fix that. But his name should be on something that lasts. Nadine pressed her fingertips against the table. She didn't speak for a long time. Then Pointy nodded once. The Reverend reached across and placed his hand over hers. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. 3 weeks later, Nadine stood in front of a door. Apartment 7C. Second floor of a newly completed affordable housing unit on 53rd Street, half a block from where she'd lived before. The building was modest. 3 stories. Clean brick. Large windows. Built to last, not to impress. Nadine had applied through the same process as every other qualifying family. She'd filled out the same forms, provided the same documentation, waited in the same line. 37 families had been approved in the first round. She was one of them. Not first. Not special. One of 37. She held the key. A real key. Metal. Heavy. Warm from her palm. She turned it in the lock. The door opened. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen with a window that looked out over the street. The walls were white, the floors were clean, the radiator worked. There was nothing in it except light. Amara pushed past her legs and ran inside. She sprinted from room to room, which took approximately 4 seconds, because there were only 3 rooms, and she screamed with the pure, unfiltered joy of a 6-year-old discovering that the world had walls again. Mama, there's a bathtub. I know, baby. A real bathtub. With handles, I know. Can I take a bath right now? Can I? You can take as many baths as you want. Amara disappeared into the bathroom. The sound of water running filled the apartment. Nadine stood in the doorway. She reached out and placed her hand flat against the wall. Just her palm, fingers spread, pressing, drywall, cool and smooth and solid beneath her skin. The first wall she had touched in 18 months that belonged to her. She stood there with her hand against the wall, and she cried. Not the kind of crying she'd done before, the quiet kind, the kind pressed into a pillow in a car at 2 a.m., so Amara wouldn't hear. This was the other kind, the kind that comes when the weight finally lifts and your body remembers how to breathe, the kind that shakes your shoulders and blurs your vision and sounds like something between laughter and breaking. She cried for Terrence, for the apartment with the butterfly stickers, for the 18 months of gas station, water, and peanut butter sandwiches, and sleeping bag nights. For every morning she pressed a uniform with a pot of boiling water and smiled at the school gate like nothing was wrong. She cried because it was over, and because she had survived it, and because surviving it had cost her something she was only now beginning to measure. From the bathroom, Amara called out, "Mama, the water's warm." Nadine wiped her face, steadied her breathing, and walked toward the sound of her daughter's voice. 6 months later, the South Side looked different, not unrecognizable. That was the point. Curtis's barbershop still stood on the corner, the red and white pole still spinning, a new coat of paint on the doorframe, but the same first haircut free sign in the window. Grace Community Fellowship still held Thursday dinners. The basketball court had been resurfaced. The rims replaced a small set of bleachers added along one side where parents sat and watched their kids play in the evenings. New buildings rose between the old ones. 3-story affordable housing units with clean brick and big windows. A community center with a computer lab and a job training office. A small medical clinic staffed 2 days a week by volunteer doctors from Northwestern. Nadine's office was on the 2nd floor of the community center. It had a window overlooking the basketball court. On her desk sat a framed photograph of Terrence holding Amara as a baby, a stack of community surveys she reviewed every week, and a small plastic water bottle, half empty, sitting beside her laptop. She never explained the water bottle to anyone who asked. She just said it was a reminder. Amara had her own room now. A real bed with a real mattress and butterfly stickers on the wall, again new ones chosen by Amara herself from a dollar store on Halsted. She had a bookshelf with 32 books, most of them donated by the library lending program. She had a desk where she did her homework every night, while Nadine cooked dinner in a kitchen with a stove that worked. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Nadine ran a free tutoring program in the community center. 12 kids, sometimes 15. She stood at a whiteboard the way she'd stood at a chalkboard 6 years ago, marker in hand, teaching fractions and reading comprehension, and the quiet belief that knowing things could change your life. Oliver visited the site every 2 weeks. He walked the blocks. He talked to residents. He ate lunch at the corner diner, where the owner still charged him double because she said billionaires could afford it. He didn't argue. On a Thursday evening in October, Oliver and Nadine stood on the sidewalk outside the basketball court. The sun was going down. Kids shouted on the court. A woman walked past with grocery bags. An old man sat on the new bleachers reading a newspaper. "Do you think it's enough?" Oliver asked. Nadine watched the kids play. A girl hit a layup, and her friends cheered. The sound echoed off the new buildings and the old ones the same way. "It's a start," she said. "That's more than most people give." Oliver nodded. He looked at the court, at the buildings, at the people, the real things his money had built, not because it was profitable, but because a woman in a car had told him the truth and he had chosen to listen. Change doesn't come from one good person doing one generous thing. Change comes when the people with power stop talking and start listening to the people without it. That's not a fairy tale. That's a choice. And it's available to anyone sitting in any chair, in any room, at any time. Nadine sat in the conference room on the 42nd floor the following Monday. The same glass walls, the same long table, the same view of the city. But her chair was at the table now. Not in the corner. Not borrowed. Hers. On the table in front of her, beside her laptop and her project folder, sat the plastic water bottle, half empty. Amara's water bottle, the one she'd offered to a bleeding stranger in the rain. Nobody in the room knew what it meant, but Nadine did, and she would never forget. You might think this story is over, but there's one more moment. Something that happened between Oliver and Nadine that neither of them planned. And it will stay with you long after this video ends. Oliver called her on a Sunday morning. His voice was different, quieter, smaller than she'd ever heard it. "I need to ask you a favor," he said. "A personal one." "What is it?" "My mother, Eleanor. She's been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. She still remembers most things now, but the doctors say that window is closing. I want to record her story, her whole life, before she forgets it." He paused. "But she won't talk to me." "Not really. She says I ask questions like a businessman. She says I listen like I'm waiting for a number. Nadine said nothing. She waited. You're a teacher, Oliver said. You know how to listen. You know how to make people feel safe enough to tell the truth. Would you sit with her? Just talk. Let her tell her story. Nadine looked at Amara sleeping on the couch. Sunday morning. Sunlight through the new curtains. The quiet hum of a home when she asked, "Today, if you're willing." Eleanor Kensington lived in a brownstone on Lincoln Park West. She was 78 years old, with white hair pinned back in a bun and hands that moved when she talked the way hands move when they remember more than the mind lets on. Nadine sat across from her at a kitchen table covered in photographs. A recording device sat between them, blinking red. Eleanor had made tea in china cups with small roses painted on the rim. She poured with steady hands. "Oliver says you used to be a teacher," Eleanor said. "I was. 3rd grade. I wanted to be a teacher," Eleanor said. "But we couldn't afford the schooling. I grew up in Pike County, Eastern Kentucky. You know it, I've heard of it. Appalachia. That's what they call it now. Back then, we just called it home. We lived in a hollow, 4-room house. No running water until I was 11. My daddy worked the mines. My mama raised 6 children on what the garden gave us and what the church shared." Eleanor's eyes drifted to a photograph on the table. A woman in a cotton dress standing on a porch squinting against the sun. Thin, proud, unbroken. "That's my mama," Eleanor said. "Ruth Pruitt. She could stretch $1 into a week's worth of meals. She could sew a winter coat from flour sacks. And for 2 years, when Daddy was too sick to work, she lived in a car." Nadine's throat tightened. "A 1952 Ford," Eleanor continued. "Parked behind the church. Pastor let her stay. She kept us clean. She kept us fed. She walked us to school every morning and waved at the gate like everything was fine." Eleanor looked up at Nadine. Her eyes were sharp and bright and full of a recognition that crossed decades. "You remind me of my mama," she said softly. "She never had nothing, but she gave everything." Nadine's hands wrapped around the china cup. The heat pressed into her palms. Her vision blurred, not from sadness, from something she had not felt in a very long time, the feeling of being seen, truly seen. Not as a homeless woman, not as a charity case, not as a consultant or a community liaison or a problem to be solved, but as a woman who had carried everything on her back and kept walking. "Thank you," Nadine whispered. Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Nadine's. The old hand and the rough hand, both strong, both worn smooth by years of holding on. "Don't thank me, child," Eleanor said. "Just keep going." That's what Mama would have said. You just keep going. Oliver stood in the hallway outside the kitchen. He had come to check on them. He hadn't meant to listen, but he heard everything: his mother's voice, Nadine's silence, the sound of 2 women recognizing each other across a distance of 50 years and 1,000 miles. He leaned against the wall, and he cried, not for his mother's fading memory, not for the deal he'd canceled, not for the money he'd redirected. He cried because he'd spent his entire life building walls around himself, glass and steel and chrome, and it had taken a woman living in a car to show him what those walls had kept out. Not danger, not risk. People, real people, with real stories, with real hands that shook when they were tired, and real eyes that burned when they'd been strong too long. Nadine hadn't just saved a neighborhood. She had saved him. And in a way, he was only beginning to understand she had saved the part of his mother that mattered most. The story, the memory, the proof that Eleanor Kensington had once been Eleanor Pruitt from a hollow in eastern Kentucky, and that her mama had lived in a car behind a church and waved at the school gate like everything was fine. When you truly see another person, when you look past the spreadsheet and the address and the clothes and the job title, when you see the human being underneath all of it, you don't just change their life. You find your own. Oliver asked Nadine one question in that boardroom. But the truth is, Nadine had been asking the world that same question her entire life. When did we stop seeing each other? What would you have answered if a billionaire asked you that question? And more importantly, Are you the Oliver in someone's story, or the Nadine? Drop your answer below. If this story made you think, hit subscribe. These aren't just stories, they're mirrors. And sometimes, the person who needs to hear it most is the one watching right now. I'll see you in the next one.